They knocked her out of her wheelchair and laughed. 30 minutes later, her quiet best friend challenged them publicly, and something happened that made the whole school go silent. But no one expected who would return at the end. Or why. The girl they pretended not to see, it was a breezy Thursday morning at Midland Ridge Middle School, just outside Birmingham, Alabama, where the sun rose bright over the faded red brick buildings and the parking lot buzzed with early chaos. Buses hissed to a stop, tires groaning against asphalt. Car doors slammed. Students spilled out in waves, laughing, shouting, dragging backpacks, clutching phones like lifelines. Voices bounced off the lockers. Sneakers squeaked across the concrete. It was the kind of organized mess that every school lived in, just before the bell rang. In the middle of it all, no one noticed the girl sitting by the flagpole. Her name was Jade Thomas, and at 13, she had already learned what it meant to disappear in plain sight. Small, quiet, soft-spoken, Jade was one of only 3 students at Midland Ridge who used a wheelchair. Born with spina bifida, she'd never taken a single step, but she also never let that stop her from showing up early, every day, rain or shine. She had her routines. She liked being early. She liked watching the sky shift colors before the morning rush. She liked knowing where the sun would hit on the ramp at exactly 7:32. These little certainties kept her steady, but there was one more reason she arrived early: to avoid the hall traffic. Fewer eyes, fewer obstacles, fewer jokes. Most days it worked, but today her best friend Raya Coleman wasn't there yet, and that changed everything. Raya was her balance, the louder voice, the fierce stare, the friend who wasn't afraid to stand when Jade couldn't. They'd been inseparable since 5th grade. But that morning, for the first time in months, Jade was alone. She waited quietly, adjusting the straps on her backpack, her hands resting on the wheels. Students streamed around her like she didn't exist. She was used to that. They never said anything cruel, but they also never said anything. They stepped over her shadow like it wasn't there, and just when she thought maybe she'd made it through the morning unnoticed, she heard footsteps slow in front of her. 3 boys. 1 tall. 1 wide. 1 with too much gel in his hair. Camden Ellis led the pack, 8th grade linebacker, local hero, the kind of kid whose last name was carved into the gym wall from alumni donations. His father had played here. His uncle had coached here. His mother was the head of the PTA. He didn't have to bully. His smirk did most of the talking. The 2 boys behind him, Tyson and Logan, followed like shadows, never thinking for themselves. They didn't say anything at first. They just stood there, blocking the ramp, staring down at her. Jade froze. Camden leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning the chair like it was a science project. Tyson flicked the rim. "You ever think about adding rockets to this thing?" he snorted. Jade's fingers tightened on the wheels. Camden smiled. "Let's clear a path." But instead of stepping aside, he did something else. He bent down, gripped the front bar of her chair, and tipped it. Not hard, just enough. Jade's body shifted. Her center of gravity tilted, her chair jerked backward. Then everything went sideways. She hit the ground, elbow first, backpack half off. Books scattered like leaves across the sidewalk, and for one awful second, everything went silent. Then came the laughter. Not loud, not wild, just cruel enough to echo. A few kids covered their mouths. Others turned away. No one stepped forward. Jade didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just lay there, blinking up at the wide blue sky, whispering something under her breath. Words no one else could hear. And that's when everything changed. because while the rest of the school stood still, someone else had just stepped off the bus, and she wasn't going to stay silent. When cruelty shows its teeth, every school has its untouchables. At TUR Midland Ridge Middle School, that title belonged to Camden Ellis, 8th grade linebacker. First string, broad shoulders, quick fists. But it wasn't just his size that made people step aside. It was his last name. His family name was everywhere, on plaques in the front office, on the Ellis family gymnasium sign above the court. His father had donated the weight room. His mother chaired every fundraiser. His uncle had once been the football coach and walked the halls like a ghost no one dared speak against. Camden wore that legacy like armor, not proudly, powerfully. Kids didn't laugh at his jokes because they were funny. They laughed because they had to. So when he and his two shadows, Tyson, lean and wired, and Logan, thick-necked and slow, blocked the front ramp that morning, no one thought twice. Not even the ones watching. They had done it before. A smirk here, a nudge there, flicking the rims on Jade Thomas's chair, calling it her spaceship, mocking the way it squeaked in hallways. But today, Camden went further. He stared down at Jade like she wasn't a classmate, but a prop, like her. Chair wasn't a tool but a joke. He didn't have to touch her, but he did anyway. His fingers gripped the front of her wheelchair. She didn't beg. She didn't back up. She barely had time to process it before he tilted it forward fast without warning. The wheels jerked. The balance shifted. Jade's body went sideways. And then, impact. The sound of a body hitting pavement isn't loud, but in the silence that followed, it might as well have been thunder. Jade's books are scattered in every direction. Her backpack twisted halfway off her shoulder. One shoe had slipped slightly. She didn't cry out. She didn't scream. She just lay there, still, eyes open, breath short, not broken, but blank. And that's when the laughter started. Soft at first, from behind the hands. Then a snort. Then full laughter from Camden and his crew. Tyson high-fived Logan. Camden pretended to flex, like he'd just scored a touchdown. The crowd didn't cheer. They just watched. No one helped. A group of 7th graders turned away. One girl clutched her books tighter and ducked into the building. A few boys recorded, not even realizing their hands were shaking. They all saw it, and did nothing. Jade didn't speak. She just stared up at the sky, her lips moving faintly, a whisper too small for anyone to hear. Then, a single motion broke the stillness. Raya Coleman stepped off bus 17. She hadn't even made it 10 feet before she saw the crowd, the circle, the boys laughing, and Jade on the ground. Her heart stopped, then surged. Raya wasn't loud. She wasn't the kind of girl who raised her hand first, or spoke, up in class. But when she saw Jade, her best friend, her sister in all but blood on the ground alone, something inside her snapped. She didn't scream. She didn't ask for permission. She dropped her backpack and cut through the crowd like a knife through fog. By the time she reached Jade, her fists were clenched and her jaw was locked. She dropped to her knees, helped Jade up gently, checked her elbow, her shoulder, her face. Jade nodded once, barely. Raya looked up, straight to Camden. His smile faltered, just slightly. That's when the hallway monitor jogged over, too late as always. Breathless, asking what happened. No one answered. The boys faded back into the crowd. The crowd dissolved, and the moment ended not with resolution, but with silence thick as cement. But what Camden didn't realize was that Raya didn't need to yell, to make noise. What she planned next would speak louder than any punch, and the whole school was going to hear it. The quiet flame. Wakes up. Raya didn't wait for a teacher. She didn't wait for permission. She dropped to her knees and reached for Jade, as if it were second nature. Her hands moved gently, checking her elbow first, then her shoulder. One strap on the backpack was twisted tight beneath her arm, and she eased it off. A scrape was blooming red on Jade's skin, the kind that would sting for days. But Jade didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just stared straight ahead. The crowd was still there, frozen, dozens of faces, blank, phones in pockets now. No more laughter, just guilt. Or was it shame? No one moved. Not one person bent down to help. Not one person said Camden's name. And the boys? They were already gone, melting into the crowd like they'd never been there in the first place. The hallway monitor finally arrived, late, breathless, asking all the wrong questions. Raya didn't answer. She kept her eyes on Jade. And then, when she was sure her friend could sit up, Raya stood slowly, but with a tension behind her shoulders that hadn't been there before. She wasn't crying, she wasn't shouting, but something had shifted. Behind her eyes, something had caught fire, and it was already looking for air. She helped Jade back into her chair without a word. The bell rang. Students scattered. Teachers began herding kids toward first period. Life tried to go back to normal, but Raya didn't follow the flow. She stood still, watching, thinking, calculating. By the second period, she had a plan. That afternoon, the school was scheduled to host its Unity Challenge, a statewide program designed to promote inclusion and teamwork. Teachers had been setting it up for weeks. There would be relays, obstacle courses, and cooperative games. Parents would be watching. Staff would be tracking behavior for the annual leadership awards. It was supposed to be a day of community building, but Raya saw something else. She saw an opening. By the third period, she had already walked straight to her homeroom teacher, Ms. Carter. Ms. Carter was in her room alone, reviewing team rosters for the afternoon. She didn't even look up when Raya entered. "You need something, Raya?" she asked, eyes still on her clipboard. Raya took a breath. "Put Camden on my team." Ms. Carter froze. She looked up slowly. Her brows lifted. Raya Coleman was not the kind of student who volunteered for much. She wasn't shy, but she wasn't loud either. A thinker and observer. She stayed out of the drama. She moved through the halls like a breeze, rarely noticed, rarely involved. "You sure about that?" Ms. Carter asked. Raya nodded. "Positive." Ms. Carter hesitated. "The teams have been assigned, but I can ask Coach Ramirez to swap someone out." "Please, do," Raya said. Her voice was calm. Her eyes were steady. No anger, no revenge burning in her tone. Just something more powerful. Conviction. By lunch, the switch had been made. Camden Ellis would be on Team Red, with Tyson, Logan, and Raya as their captain. Outside, cones were being placed on the field. Loudspeakers were tested. The obstacle relay, one of the final events, was being set up with a brand new twist. A wheelchair push across uneven ground, where one teammate had to push another holding the baton. Raya watched from a distance, eyes narrowed at the terrain. There were bumps, small dips, curves that would slow down anyone not paying attention. Perfect. She took a folded sheet of paper out of her pocket, her original team list. Then she drew a single line through one name. Below it, she wrote a new one in bold letters: Jade. She didn't want payback. She didn't need applause. She wanted Camden to feel what it meant to carry the weight of someone else's struggle. And by the end of the day, the whole school would understand the difference between being strong and being human. Games, teams, and a hidden plan. The sun sat high over Midland Ridge Middle School. heating the open field behind the gym as students poured out in groups, dressed in bright team shirts. Red, blue, yellow, and green dotted the landscape like pieces in a giant game board. Parents lined the edge of the field, phones raised, sun visors shielding their eyes. Teachers guided clusters of kids toward different relay stations, clipboards, in hand, voices raised above the buzz of pre-race excitement. Loud pop music boomed from a cheap speaker near the snack table. It was Unity Challenge Day, a tradition meant to build school spirit, celebrate teamwork, and show off who could run the fastest without dropping a beanbag. But for Raya Coleman, it wasn't just a game. This was the strategy. This was the moment she'd been building since that morning. This was where silence became action. She walked across the field in her red team shirt, clipboard in hand, hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Students stepped aside without knowing why. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She was in charge. Coach Ramirez, watching from the sidelines, gave her a small nod. He had made the roster change she asked for. Team Red now had 4 names. Raya, Coleman, Camden, Ellis, Tyson, Moore, Logan, Price, a lineup that looked like chaos on paper. But Raya had a plan. Camden hadn't seen the final event details yet. He was too busy lounging near the bleachers with Tyson and Logan, tossing a football back and forth like nothing had changed. They still thought this was just another game they'd breeze through. They still thought Raya was just a quiet girl who'd had a lucky morning. But all of that was about to shift. The day moved quickly. Events flew by: 3-legged races, trust walks, water balloon tosses. Students laughed, stumbled, and shouted across the field. But Raya didn't laugh. She kept her eyes on the final setup at the far end, the obstacle relay. This was the anchor event, the big finish, the challenge that determined who got the principal's leadership lunch invite next week and who cleaned the cafeteria for 5 days straight. But this year, the rules had changed. Coach Ramirez stood in the center of the field and lifted the mic. All teams, listen up. The final leg of today's obstacle relay will require one team member to push another in a wheelchair. The person riding must carry the baton across the finish line. If they drop it, they restart. A few confused murmurs rippled through the students. Camden laughed. Wait, what? Then he saw the wheelchair, and then he saw her, Jade, rolling toward the station. Her elbow was wrapped in a clean white bandage. A navy t-shirt was tucked in, hair pulled back. Expression unreadable, and resting in her lap. The baton. Camden's laugh, cut off like someone had flipped a switch. He looked at Raya. She stood next to the chair, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. You're pushing her, she said, calm, certain. Camden blinked. Wait, what? She's the rider, you're the runner. It's your leg. His jaw tensed. That's not. Those are the rules, Raya said, handing him the gloves. He took them, slowly. No more swagger, no more grin, just silence. The relay started. Other teams sprinted through cones and ladders, tags flying, legs pumping. The crowd clapped, cheered, and shouted names. The music rose. Raya ran her section like a machine, passed the baton. Tyson followed, then Logan. Now came Camden. His turn. His moment. He jogged up, eyes darting, breath short. Jade waited calmly in position, hands in her lap. He looked at her. She looked forward. No smile, no scowl, just that same calm that rattled him more than yelling ever could. He took the grips of the wheelchair. Ready? He muttered. Jade didn't respond. Coach Ramirez blew the whistle. Camden began to push. The course was not smooth. There were cones, speed bumps, narrow turns, loose turf. At the second curve, the front wheel jolted. Jade leaned left, steadying them. Slow down. You're tipping the chair. Camden adjusted, tightened his grip. The crowd leaned in. At the final stretch, the field grew quiet, only the sound of wheels, dirt, and breath. Jade lifted the baton high. The crowd erupted. They crossed the finish line first. Camden stood behind the chair, hands still gripping the handles. Jade sat still, chest rising and falling, baton in hand like a torch. No words. No cheers, just truth in motion. The rules had been simple, the stakes had been higher, but the look on Camden's face, that was the moment the school finally saw what power looks like when it's held with grace. The wheel turns in public. The crowd was louder now, buzzing with energy as the final relay began. Team banners waved in the breeze. Students leaned over the cones to shout names. Teachers clapped from the sidelines, some filming, some shielding their eyes from the sun. Parents squinted behind sunglasses, tracking their kids like they were watching the Olympics. This was the last event. The big finale. The one they'd remember. And Raya Coleman wasn't about to let it slip. She took her position at the starting line, baton in hand, knees bent, eyes locked forward. Her red team shirt clung to her back, soaked in sweat, but her focus never wavered. The whistle blew. Raya took off like lightning. Her feet tore through the turf, arms pumping, heart racing, not from nerves, but from purpose. Every step pounded, out a rhythm that matched the fire in her chest. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She flew past the first cone, tapped the marker, and thrust the baton into Tyson's waiting hand. Tyson charged next, cutting through the zigzag cones with practiced speed. Logan followed, stumbling slightly but catching himself with a laugh. The baton passed hand in hand, rhythm building, energy rising, and then Camden stepped up, his turn, his part, his reckoning. The moment he reached the final leg, his eyes locked on the wheelchair. Jade was waiting, calm, centered. The bandaged elbow is resting on the armrest. Her fingers curled around the baton, poised like a runner waiting for the gunshot. Camden hesitated for just a second, then reached for the grips, his fingers wrapped around the handlebars. No turning back now. Coach Ramirez blew the whistle again. The crowd roared, and they were off. The course twisted immediately. Dirt underfoot, uneven patches of grass, a narrow corner lined with cones just wide enough for the wheels. Camden started too fast. The chair wobbled. Left, Jade said quietly. Slow down. Don't tip me. Camden's jaw tightened, but he listened. He adjusted, shifted his weight, centered the chair. They cleared the first turn. The second curve hit harder. A bump jolted the wheels. One cone was knocked loose and rolled sideways. Camden grunted, muscles straining, eyes darting from the path to the finish line. Steady, Jade whispered. This part dips. He followed her lead. Without realizing it, he had started to trust her, not just to sit still, but to guide. Something in him clicked. He wasn't just pushing a chair anymore. He was moving with her. For her. The final stretch approached. Everything around them blurred, cheering, clapping, breathless shouts. Camden's legs burned. Sweat poured into his eyes, but Jade, she lifted the baton high. Like a flag. Like a message. Like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. They crossed the finish line. First, for one long second, silence. Then a wave of sound crashed over the field. Applause. Not the polite kind, not the forced clapping that teachers give after a long day. Real applause, the kind that starts small then builds. The kind that travels from the sidelines to the center. The kind that changes the air. Students stared. Teachers exchanged glances. Parents looked at each other like they'd just seen something they couldn't unsee. Jade didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just held the baton high, steady, fierce, unshaken. Camden stood behind her, hands still on the grips of the chair, breathing hard, chest heaving. Not from exhaustion, but from something else. Understanding. Maybe regret. Probably. But for the first time all day, he didn't speak, and he didn't smirk. He just stood there, quiet, behind the girl he had pushed over hours earlier, now pushing her across a finish line. But this wasn't the end of a race. This wasn't the end of a challenge. This was the beginning of truth, of consequences, and of the moment when everyone at Midland Ridge Middle finally realized that silence makes you a witness, but action makes you part of the story. A stage, a voice, a crowd that finally listened to Bondi. Monday after the Unity Challenge was quiet, too quiet. No one spoke about the relay out loud. Not yet. But the atmosphere at Midland Ridge Middle School had shifted. It wasn't just the photos posted online, or the video clips floating through group chats. It was the feeling that something had cracked, and light had finally gotten in. Even Principal Gaines felt it. He sat in his office that morning sipping coffee and sorting through weekend emails when there was a knock. Raya Coleman stood in the doorway. Calm. Focused. Still in her red team hoodie, a clipboard tucked under one arm. "I need 10 minutes at Friday's assembly," she said. Principal Gaines raised an eyebrow. "Assembly?" She nodded. "And Jade, we need to speak." He blinked, setting his mug down slowly. "You want the mic? At character counts?" Raya didn't waver. "Yes, sir." He paused. Looked at her longer this time. There was something in her eyes that reminded him of teachers who'd stayed late without pay. Of students who showed up early even when no one noticed. He nodded once. 10 minutes. Don't waste them. That Friday, the gym filled just like it always did. Students slouched in rows on the bleachers. Teachers leaned against the walls. Phones buzzed. Sneakers squeaked. The microphone cracked as the assistant principal adjusted it too close to her mouth. The usual. It was routine. It was background noise. The students had no idea they were about to witness something they'd remember for years. After the announcements, after Student of the Month, after the monthly kindness quote from Mr. Jensen. Principal Gaines stepped forward. "Before we wrap up," he said, voice calm but pointed, "2 of our students would like to share something. Please give your attention to Raya Coleman and Jade Thomas." A few heads turned. Raya stepped out first. Her steps were slow but sure. She wore no makeup. No drama. Just truth. Behind her, Jade wheeled forward, back straight, eyes forward, her bandage now replaced by a simple wrist wrap. The baton she had carried during the relay lay across her lap like a symbol no one could ignore. They stopped at the center court. The gym fell silent. Raya took the mic first, her voice didn't tremble. "Most of you saw what happened last week," she began. "Some of you laughed, some of you looked away, and some of you just didn't care." The room shifted. Some students looked up. Some teachers stood straighter. Raya scanned the bleachers, her voice building, not louder but clearer. "But here's the truth. Jade didn't fall because of her chair. She fell because we let cruelty look normal." Silence. Raya continued. "We talk about inclusion. We hang posters about kindness. But when it actually matters, when someone needs us to act, what do we do?" She paused. No one moved. She turned to Jade, then handed her the mic. Jade's fingers curled around it carefully. She didn't need to clear her throat. Her voice was soft. But the mic made it ring out like glass in a quiet room. "My name is Jade Thomas," she said. "I've been in a chair my whole life, and most days I don't think about it." She took a breath. "But last week I was reminded of what some people still see when they look at me." She glanced around the room. "I became a punchline." She paused again, just long enough to let the weight settle. "But here's what you didn't see." Her hands tightened on the armrests. "You didn't see the miles I pushed through in physical therapy. You didn't see my mom, who works double shifts to fix what insurance won't cover. You didn't see the nights I practiced getting up by myself. You only saw the fall. A ripple moved through the students. A cough. A shift in weight. A phone screen turned off." Jade looked up, her eyes cutting straight through the room. "What I need you to see now is a girl who got back up." No one clapped. Not yet. It wasn't time. The silence was too thick, too earned, and then one student in the corner stood. Clapped once, then again. Another joined, and another. Within seconds, the entire gym was on its feet. Not from pity, not from pressure, with respect. Even the teachers, even the staff, even Principal Gaines, who wiped the corner of his eye with his sleeve. Jade didn't smile. Not until she turned to Raya, who was already smiling back. They stood together, a girl who had been knocked down, and a girl who had refused to let it go unanswered. After the assembly, the school halls were different. No one said Camden's name out loud, but they didn't need to. He walked slower, spoke less. He had felt it too, not the words, not even the applause, the truth. And that truth was still echoing. But they hadn't asked for attention. They didn't want praise. Raya and Jade had stepped into the spotlight, not to be seen, but to make sure no one else had to fall into silence again. And now, it was time to turn that moment into a movement. The apology that meant something. The library was quiet the next morning, not just in volume, but in energy. The usual low hum of whispers and rustling pages felt softer, like the whole building was holding its breath. A rainstorm had passed overnight, leaving the windows streaked with moisture and the sky outside heavy and gray. Inside, tucked between the nonfiction shelves and the reading corner, Jade Thomas sat beside Raya Coleman, flipping through a worn poetry book. Their voices were low, their laughter was even lower, but it was there, real, not forced. It was the first time Jade had laughed all week. Then footsteps approached, slow ones, hesitant. Jade looked up first, then Raya. Camden Ellis stood a few feet away, hands in his hoodie pockets, shifting his weight, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there. For the first time in his life at Midland Ridge, he wasn't leading with his shoulders. He looked smaller somehow, not physically but in posture. Like his own guilt had deflated whatever image he used to carry. He cleared his throat. I didn't mean for it to go that far." His voice was low, eyes darting between them, a nervous scratch at the back of his neck. "I was just messing around. I didn't think she'd—" Raya's gaze cut through him, calm, direct. "You didn't think," she said. "That's the only part of that sentence that matters." Camden froze. He opened his mouth again, then shut it, took a breath, looked down. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "For real. I was being a jerk." He turned to Jade, but didn't step forward. She met his eyes, her expression unreadable. "I forgive you," she said after a long pause. "But I don't need you to be sorry. I need you to do better." That landed harder than any lecture. Camden nodded slowly, There were no comebacks, no excuses, just that, a promise he didn't make out loud, but one he knew he had to keep. Later that week, Jade's chair squeaked slightly as she rolled over a seam in the hallway floor. A wheel had started sticking from the rain and rough terrain of the relay course. She didn't complain. She never did. But someone noticed. Camden, walking behind her with a tray of cafeteria supplies for the lunch monitors, paused when he saw her struggling to pivot. He hesitated, then stepped forward. "I'm decent with tools," he said. "My uncle fixes bikes and stuff. I could take a look if you want." Jade raised an eyebrow. "You offering to be my mechanic now?" Camden cracked a short laugh. "Maybe." She shrugged. "We'll see." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. And that mattered. Because Camden wasn't just trying to fix the chair. He was trying to fix something else, not for credit, not for applause, but because he was beginning to realize that doing better wasn't about big speeches, it was about small, consistent choices. The halls at Midland Ridge started to feel different. After that, not perfect, but different. Camden walked slower. He didn't push past people like before. He stopped mocking the quiet kids. He started helping the AV team set up chairs for events, not to be noticed, just to show up. And Jade? She kept rolling forward, kept reading, kept laughing. Her chair still made noise on the floor, but now when it squeaked, no one laughed. People heard it and moved aside, not out of pity, but respect. Because change doesn't start in assemblies. It doesn't start with applause. It starts in hallways and libraries and everyday moments where someone decides to act differently than they did the day before. Voices that refused to shrink spring arrived early in Birmingham, brushing the sidewalks of Midland Ridge Middle School, with sunlight and the scent of cut grass. The rain was gone, the clouds had moved on, and the days felt warmer, in more ways than one. The calendar read April, which meant it was time for one of the school's oldest traditions, the spring showcase. Every year students signed up to perform, singing, dancing, comedy, piano solos. The gym transformed into a stage, parents filled the back bleachers, and teachers sat proudly in the front rows with clipboards and smiles. Most students rehearsed for weeks, fueled by nerves and excitement. Jade Thomas hadn't signed up. Not at first, but Raya Coleman had other ideas. "We should do it," she said one afternoon, as they sat beneath the magnolia tree near the track field. Jade raised an eyebrow. "Do what?" "Spoken word, like we wrote in the library." Jade shook her head immediately. "That was just for us." "Maybe," Raya said, "but maybe someone else needs to hear it too." There was a pause. Jade didn't say no again. They met every afternoon for 2 weeks, after the bell rang and the buses pulled away, huddled in the library or the back of the science wing, writing on loose-leaf paper and scribbling on the backs of notebooks. Their poem wasn't loud, but it was powerful. Each word was chosen like a stone. Soft fire, sharp truth. Jade wrote about being invisible and unbreakable. Raya wrote about the silence that screamed. They practiced until their voices fit like gears in the same machine. 2 girls, 2 voices, 1 message. The night of the showcase arrived with a hum of nervous energy. The gym glowed with string lights and stage lamps. Families filled the seats, phones ready to record. Kids in glittery shoes shuffled behind the curtain. A tap dancer went first, then a ukulele solo. A group of 7th graders lip-synced to a throwback hit and drew laughter from the crowd. Then the mic crackled. Mr. Hargrove, the drama teacher, stepped up. "Our next performers," he said, reading from a card, "are Raya Coleman and Jade Thomas, performing an original spoken word piece. The gym quieted. A ripple moved through the students. Raya stepped out first. Then came Jade, wheeling forward, face calm, back straight. They stopped at the center court. No music, no spotlight tricks, just two girls, one standing, one seated, facing a crowd that was finally ready to listen. Raya began. They told me quiet girls don't start revolutions. That stillness was weakness. That silence was soft. But I've seen storms roll in on wheels. Jade took the mic, her voice steady. I've been invisible. I've been avoiding. I've been the joke in a hallway no one dares admit they heard. But now, I am the period at the end of your assumptions. Their words laced back and forth like a tide, rising, retreating, returning with more weight. They didn't yell, they didn't need to. Every sentence cuts deeper than the last. You saw a chair. I need you to see me. The room held its breath. And for a full 5 seconds after they finished, no one moved. Then, thunder, applause roared from the bleachers. Not polite, not automatic. Earned, deserved, alive. Jade's mom stood at the back, one hand over her mouth, tears in her eyes. Even Principal Gaines clapped harder than he had all year. Even Camden Ellis, sitting with his younger brother in the third row, didn't clap right away. He just watched. He saw something that night he hadn't understood before. He saw what power looked like when it came from truth instead of fear. Jade and Raya didn't bow. They didn't need to. They rolled off stage laughing, light, free, whole. That night, they weren't background characters. They weren't supporting roles. They were the story. And even when the applause faded, even when the lights dimmed and the chairs were folded away, the words they had spoken didn't disappear. They echoed in hallways, in whispers, in hearts that had finally been cracked open wide enough to listen. Aftershocks and new foundations. The showcase faded into memory, but something deeper had been planted. A week later, Principal Gaines stood before the staff with an announcement. Midland Ridge Middle would begin hosting a monthly student forum, a space for stories, for reflection, for accountability. They called it the Circle. No desks, no podiums, just voices, floor mats and folding chairs arranged in a wide open loop. Students could speak or sit in silence. They could bring a story, a concern, a poem, or they could just come to listen. Camden Ellis showed up to the first one. He didn't speak, but he didn't fidget either. He sat, listened, took it in. When someone mentioned hallway bullying, he didn't look away. He looked at them, and that was enough for now. Meanwhile, Raya Coleman had started spending more time in the main office. First, to meet with teachers. Then, to meet with district reps. By the time April ended, Principal Gaines invited her to lead the school's first Student Diversity Council. You've got a voice, he said, and you've got follow-through. She said yes. Her first meeting had 7 students. By the 3rd week, they had doubled. She didn't give speeches. She asked questions, created space, listened, learned, then led. Jade Thomas didn't return to Midland Ridge that fall. Her doctors had recommended a school with better accessibility, a newer building, a team more familiar with mobility support. So she enrolled at Washington High, just 15 minutes away. It wasn't easy. New faces, new ramps, new lunchroom stairs. But in her first week, she found something unexpected. A poetry club. Students who wrote during classes. Kids who brought spiral notebooks to lunch. Teenagers who turned rage into rhythm and silence into stanzas. She shared her piece from the showcase on the 2nd Friday. Her hands trembled as she read it. She finished, looked up and saw a girl with green streaks in her hair crying. "I needed that," the girl whispered. "Thank you." Jade smiled and knew she was right where she was meant to be. Despite going to different schools, Jade and Raya made a promise. Every Sunday, check in, no skipping, no excuses. Sometimes they wrote poems together over video chat. Other times they just sat in silence, watching the same cloud pass by in two different places. But they always showed up. Always. By the start of the next year, a new mural had gone up at Midland Ridge. It stretched across the long hallway above, the 6th grade lockers. One girl stood clipboard in hand, head held high. Beside her, a girl in a wheelchair, baton in lap, eyes fixed forward. Neither smiled. They didn't have to. They were present, visible, unapologetically there. Above them, in painted block letters, read, "Respect doesn't ask permission." There was no plaque, no fanfare, but everyone knew what it meant. Years passed, faces changed, walls got painted. But the story? It didn't fade. It lived in every choice that followed, the legacy of the day. Everything changed. At Midland Ridge, the story became more than a memory. It became a myth. New 6th graders whispered about the girl who got knocked down and how the school changed afterwards. Teachers pointed to the mural and said, "That's where it started." Hallway jokes slowed. Peer helpers increased. The circle became a school tradition. And once a year, the gym filled again for the Unity Showcase, where students weren't just allowed to speak, they were expected to. Camden Ellis, now a high school junior, walked his little brother through Midland Ridge during orientation. They stopped in front of the mural. "You see that?" Camden said, hands in his pockets. His brother nodded. "That's what strength looks like." His brother tilted his head. "The one in the chair?" Camden smiled. "Both of them." Meanwhile, over at Washington High, Jade Thomas stood at the podium of her school's open mic event. Same voice. New setting. The piece was different now. Evolved. Sharper. A little bolder. But the fire was the same. As she rolled off stage, a sophomore approached her with damp eyes and an unsure smile. "I needed that," she whispered. "Thank you." Jade nodded, gently, feeling the words ripple out like circles in water. And Raya? She never stopped. She continued leading the Diversity Council at Midland Ridge, then applied for the state's Youth Leadership Initiative. She spoke at conferences, built new programs, helped create peer mentorship groups. And every time someone tried to shrink her presence, she stood taller, because she had learned that silence is where injustice thrives. The world didn't change overnight, but a hallway did, a relay did, a poem did. And sometimes that's enough to start something, because strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it rolls, sometimes it waits, and sometimes it rises together. And that was the day silence ended at Midland Ridge. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe for more powerful moments, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. The best comment, it gets pinned, let your voice rise just like theirs did.